on this month's numbers and how we went from about 61,000 above the curve to 1,000,003 or 4 below the curve.
I may look to Eddie to start us off, and then I'll join.
Okay.
No problem. Good
Evening,
evening.
Ed.
Good evening, everyone. I'll start off with the narrative. As of right now, we're reporting on January 31st as a close. That's about that is 5 of the months of a 10-month school year. We're at 50% of our year-to-date budget as expected, of the 139,585. We expended 67 million. We encumbered about 73 million minus, we did some addition, and I know Al, you had asked John about it. Originally it was 1.6. For some reason, when we moved some stuff over from Ivy into the Excel spreadsheet, it took one column and didn't take the other one, but that 1.3 is where we're at right now. So if you look at the 73 million minus the 71 million for, it's really 1.6, but that's because one of the line didn't come over. What was liquidated was the health insurance for the month of January for $276,000. That's what brings us as of today, or as of January 31st, to the 1.3 deficit that we're currently looking at possibly. And I want to touch a few things, and then I'll pass it over to John. As we're all aware, the Omicron variance was very heavy in January. It affected a lot of our staff, our teachers, which was difficult. I know we had to kind of close school for a few days because of it. And then what happened was our overages. Overages is basically if a teacher's out and there's no one to cover, we have to grab someone on their free period or on their prep period to kind of cover that area. So good thing is we have a vacancy line of about 5 to 6 vacancy teachers. Majority of this overage is coming from the high school. So it covers about 600,000.
Eddie, excuse me. We have an IT question. An unknown, the Zoom user, if that's Michelle, please unmute your mic and identify yourself. Because we had an unknown user on our call.
I was on before.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I
Yeah,
can
I
hear
was
you.
started. Yeah.
Thank you.
Al, may I ask who Kim's iPhone is? Do we know who that person is?
Jim's iPhone.
That's Kim Thompson.
Thank you, Kim. Just wanted to confirm.
Happy to take the night off if you'd like me to leave.
We're always happy to have you, Kim.
Nobody
Thank
gets
you.
off the hook
Thank
that
you.
easy here. We spent a lot of time together yesterday, so we're going to
We did indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Kenny, we all set? Okay. Sorry to interrupt, Eddie. Please continue.
No problem. We want to make sure there's no anyone trying to sneak in, right? So going back to the overages, so we had we currently have 6 vacancies, a total about $600,000. But as of right now, we've used about $450,000 hitting that vacancy line due to the overage. Good thing is as of today and tomorrow and Friday, the weather is clearing up. Seems like the pandemic is kind of coming down in regards to positivity rates. So we're hoping we don't see as many overages or, teacher staff being out because of the COVID variants or, whatever variance is out there. In this case, it was the Omicron. And then I move into the next part, which is the budget indicates a shortfall. And John is going to touch base on that. We've been really looking into it, him and I, the cabinet, trying to figure out what happened on this June 8th meeting that was approved back in, last June, right before, kind of the board kind of went. ESSER 3 wasn't approved really, or we didn't get the guidance until August, even though Courtney and the team and the cabinet submitted all their information and what the needs were. So that's my update as of right now. I'm going to pass it over to John to kind of touch base on our that 1.3 transportation and where we see ourselves now, February 16th till June 30th.
Before I do, Al or committee, are there any other questions on the other parts of the report before we talk about that? Or would it be better to talk about this first and then come back? It's your preference.
Let's complete it, and with questions,
Okay.
we'll come back and.
So it was actually June 9th, and we're going to talk about that, I think, quite a bit in the next couple of months. That was the night the board passed its budget resolution. And what you had to work from at the time, I'm going to show this. It was a fiscal year budget planning document. I don't know if I can share my screen. I have it, but you might remember there was a sort of a 5-year look forward at the operating budget. And then, and you had seen this, I think, a couple times. There was a sort of a spreadsheet that showed what was going to come from the city, as it was called, what would come from Alliance, what would come from the CARES Act, what would come from ESSER 2, and what would come from ESSER 3. Because there was quite a bit of change, needed to come back to school full-time, face-to-face, and the social distancing that was required, some of the social emotional needs that were going to be met with the grant, and things like that. We just, I don't know, I may try and, is that you, Eddie, sharing your screen? Okay, well, I'll keep going. And part of the plan was multifaceted. So there was, what we ended up with, we adopted a general fund budget of 139 million. But there was another 2.2 million of needs. And what we voted to do was to pay for those needs from the ESSER 3 grant. And what we're starting to see today is those expenses beginning to be incurred in the general fund, and we haven't moved those over to be paid for by the grant yet. But let me just point out one thing that was mentioned back on June 9th. The 2.2 million was described as restoration. Because if you recall, on when Sal first presented his budget for this year, we wanted more than the city said. We actually said we needed $6 million to keep things, or 6% to keep things going. And part of the reasons were transportation. We said there had been transportation that needed to be added for enrollment growth that hadn't been funded. There was a one-time credit in transportation that was going to be lost, and there were some other things. Okay, there's the page. And we said we needed those, we needed 6% to maintain what we had. And we didn't get that. But so what we did was we looked to the ESSER grant, ESSER 3 grant, to find the money. And so what we're really operating under this year is a school budget that's 139 million. You see it right there in the column under city, and we'll get back to that in a second. But Ed, I wonder if you could just go to the last page for a second that shows the total of the ESSER 3 down a little further. I think it might be on yours, right there.
Okay.
Right above the dark bar is 2.245 million. And you can see that's included in the $8 million of ESSER funds. And the way we described it, you don't see it on that page, was it's called restoration. And it said it was for enrollment addition, includes 330,000 for teaching staff, 215,000 for ESL bilingual teachers, 300,000 for special ed tutors, 410,000 for transportation. And remember, we had trouble explaining why the transportation budget was so low compared to next year's last week when we presented the budget. And that's because for this year, we were planning to do some out of the grant. And then 15,000 for equipment. But this is what it's, I think this is the important line in what you were looking at in June. It says, this was not restored in last year's budget. We continue to carry the need forward. So that's the 2.2. We probably could have done this a different way as the months went on and said, well, when these bills come in, we'll just charge it in the grant, and we wouldn't look like we were pointing negative. But we didn't. If something were so far, if something was a bill from STA, we charged it where it was, or some of these teachers were budgeted where they always have been budgeted. We just kept going. But now from doing that, we're showing the deficit, and we're going to have to move some of that expense out into the grant. As you can see, we're looking at 1.3 million so far from our report. We have 2.2 million available. So that's the that's the reminder of this was our plan all along. So I'll take questions if at this point, if you'd like.
Okay. For my broad stroke, is this will be covered with ESSER 3, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sure.
Although it's
If
not
you
gonna
led with
be-
that, my blood pressure would have stayed, would
Yeah.
have.
Well, except I have to say that it won't be exactly as we thought it might be. And what I mean is, when we first started hearing about ESSER 3 and the American Rescue Plan, initially what everyone was told is, well, this will be more, it won't be as restricted as ESSER 2. You'll have more flexibility. We know you have needs that we don't quite know what they are yet. So I think we all thought we could use this in a wide variety of ways. But then months later, and that news really came from the federal government. That's where the money originates this is the American Rescue Plan. But then what the federal government does is they look for the different states to administer these grants. It doesn't come directly to us. It goes through the states. Both the city and ourselves got grants, American Rescue Plan grants. Ours is called ESSER. And in our case, guidelines were laid down by the state education department. In the city's case, guidelines were laid down by the Office of Policy and Management. So we're managing them differently. But our guidelines came in August, and the grant, I think, was due the application in September. And the things that they said you could do with the grant were not some of these things we had planned to do. For example, what they say about transportation is that if you need to, if you're having trouble getting drivers, and the thought was, well, drivers like other people in the workforce aren't coming back to work, they're not interested, and you have to pay a premium or a bonus to get drivers to come in, then that you can charge against the grant. Or if you need more buses to distance your students for socially distancing, like we're doing with Brookfield, that's okay too. But you're not allowed to just take operating money and put it in a grant, then de facto, it becomes just relief for the taxpayers. And it helps keep the tax levy down. And that's not what they wanted to do with this money. They wanted to help with the pandemic, get schools back open safely and things like that. So that's one of the reasons we didn't just start charging these things as planned, because we have to stay within the guidelines. Now, I believe there's other things in our budget that will fit the guidelines. For example, some of the social workers that we use to help with social emotional things. There are some premiums in the transportation that could go in, but not all of it. Possibly some of the ESL bilingual teachers. And I think we can find the things. But, you know, everyone had the best interest at heart back in June, and now we know a little more, and you know, we're well into the school year. So
Okay.
it's a difficult story to tell. There's a lot of parts to it.
We have an hour.
Well, I do have another piece we can get to, but let's see if there's any questions on the ESSER funding. And everyone understands that our spending plan is really 142 million this year. It's not 139 because we didn't make any cuts in June when the city said you're not getting what you asked for.
Right. But it also in June, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the last administration or last finance crew team to use the ESSER money to take care of that shortfall, and now we're aware of it, and
Mhm.
we'll have
Yes.
to deal with that in the future. But we are covered for the current budget.
I believe we are. I
Okay.
believe there's eligible expenses in our operating budget that can be moved over. I do.
Okay, but I was also, it can be covered with the ESSER 3 funds. The
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
I think what we have to be careful of as we get into the new budget is that we don't do the same thing. Because I think there's an expectation, not just here, but in other places, that the ESSER is more like the Alliance grant, where we have a lot of flexibility, that we can just move operating expenses in if they're certain ones. The ESSER really is pandemic related.
All right. John, if I'd like to open up to other members of the committee if they have any questions. Finance Subcommittee, any questions, please? Committee
One
members
que-
only.
One question. Being a city worker, can you, in my experience, you can't, once you establish a budget, you can't change the lines? I mean, is this okay for the school budget? It's okay to change the lines amount to something else?
Yep. It's a good question. There are two sets of rules. One that applies to boards of education and one that applies to all other city departments. I like to explain it this way, that a city council or the mayor has line item veto authority on the individual lines, and only they can make transfers, or they can promulgate the rules for, you know, police, fire, public works, all of the things that fall under the mayor's responsibility. Board of Education's is a little different. A city council cannot make specific reductions in an operating budget. They can only make a lump sum. So if we ask for 152 million, they can say, we're only giving you 150. And then the Board of Education decides where to take those cuts. But they are allowed to transfer within the lines with that. And the example I use is you're as a Board of Ed, you're responsible, for example, for graduation requirements. You have to, a diploma from Danbury High School means a lot. And it means that students have taken certain courses and passed certain things. And you can't have a city council saying, well, we're gonna do something else, or we're not gonna, you don't need algebra books in 9th grade, use the old ones and that kind of thing. It's not their call. You have the responsibility, so the state gives you the budget authority within what the city sets for you. Now, capital is a whole different ballgame. With capital, which are larger expenditures, like the Matrix and things like that, Ellsworth, the cities do have line item veto authority, and only they can move from line to line. We cannot do that. Where our authority ends with our operating budget. So that's how they do it.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Committee members, are there any other questions? Okay. John, please continue, sir.
I'm sorry, Al, I didn't mean to
Yeah.
interrupt you. I just have a quick question, John. I noticed that we saw a pretty big bump on health insurance, the health insurance line. I don't know if you had any feedback on that.
Yeah, we, a couple months ago, I think you remember me saying we did not encumber our health insurance for the year, and it was distorting our bottom line. So we put, in other words, we wrote a purchase order to Cigna with the hopes that each month as we paid it, we'd reduce that purchase order, but we didn't connect them in the system. We probably should have. I thought Bev would just automatically reduce it and didn't follow up on it. So it's an inexact match right now, and that's what's going on. Yeah,
Okay.
I think we should
Yeah, that makes
Should have
sense. I
change the
just,
encumbrance better, right? Yep.
I know that's like a moving target as well anyways. So, I appreciate the explanation. I just wanted
Yeah.
to kind of make that a little bit more transparent.
Mhm. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Something else while we're on it. Eddie, do you want to put that first page up that shows the grid again like this? So, as you guys know better than I, the mayor from the charter must present a total budget to the city council. So that includes a Board of Ed budget, but it's the other one, Ed, the one you had up before. But it's the city council and the Board of Ed, there it is, that determine the budget. And so if you read the mayor's budget last spring, as he talked about what he suggested for the Board of Education, he mentioned that there was an agreement, and it's right in writing. He said there was an agreement between the city and the Board of Education to use what he then described as 3.5 million from prior year funds or non-lapsing funds. Now, as I believe that's what they thought would be left over in a prior budget. I'm trying to get some information on that, because what remained at the end of 2020 was $2.4 million. That was unencumbered. That would have gone back to the city. And if you look at this page here, I'm sorry it's so small, but I'm sorry, I'd go back to the page you had. the 139 million that we're spending, actually we're spending 142, but the 139 is described as coming from 3 or 4 places or reasons. And the way it's displayed is, here's the previous year budget, and here's what we're adding to it. We're going to add some money for enrollment. We're going to add some money for increases. But again, on June 9th, your resolution said that our 139 million was going to be made up of really 2 things. 137 million from the city and 2.4 million in non-lapsing funds. And you can see it right there. It's in the city column. It's the 4th number down. And that's was baked right into your resolution. But what I'm trying to find out is, were there any strings attached to that? And what the reason I am is, I received, after we approved our budget for next year, I got I was emailing David St. Hilaire for another reason. And he said to me, oh, I happen to notice your budget. Are you sure you're using the right beginning number? So I said, I emailed back. I said, yes, 139 million. Here's the resolution our board adopted. And he wrote back and he said, well, no, he said, that non-lapsing fund, that's really for one-time occurrences. If you have unexpected transportation or special ed and things like that. That's not how we've understood it. So I wanted everybody to know that he's asked that question, and maybe there's something that was talked about with that, or was there an agreement as the mayor had described, or but it's become a question mark.
It's that, just to give the committee a heads up, if you guys can see that motion on the top C, you guys see that right in here?
Barely. Can't read it.
Okay, I'll zoom right in.
Thank you.
How's
Yeah.
that? Good?
Yeah.
Much better. Thank you, Ed.
So it says, second line, the Board of Education is all proposing to utilize an estimated 2.437. So in the second line, there's 137 million. That's where we get our 139 from. And I thought nothing of it until the email came. I honestly would have thought if there was a agreement between the board and the mayor's office, as he described in his book, at least there would have been some communication back to you somehow. We weren't able to find it today.
But that communication, is that in the district office anywhere, Ed? Or John?
Kara looked once today. She didn't find. We're going to look some more.
Okay. Exhibit 2189. Okay. Page 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trying to see if there were any email communications sent between city and the board or whatever, but nothing as John mentioned, as of today.
Okay. Interesting.
Right.
And that was emailed to you by Mr.
David
St.
St. Hilaire on Thursday. Yeah, we were, I forget, we pass information back on different things all the time. It was something different we were emailing about, and then he said, oh, I saw your budget. We must have posted on the website. And he thought we were starting from too low of a number.
Okay. All right.
Yep. So the way I left it, I said, we want to talk to you about this. But I'm not ready yet to say, my own feeling is, it's the city that comes up with the sources of money. If we, demonstrate a need of 139 million, how they finance that is up to them. They're the.
Okay, we'll be.
Yep.
Proposing life. Okay.
So that's what we have to report tonight.
All right.
Mm.
I know we have another committee meeting at 6:30. Are there any other board members on board that would like to ask a quick question? I know we've held it to committee members at this point. Madam Chair?
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't recall anything about that 2.4 in the non-lapsing funds. Any other agreement with that. So when you built the budget for next year, you assumed the 139.
That's right. And his inference was we should have started from 137.
Yeah.
But we built it kind of on a zero, not kind of, we built it on a zero basis. As you saw with transportation, we just said, here are the buses we need and here's what it costs. We did the same thing with teachers. We never rolled forward any lines like by adding. Every line was looked at. We said, here's what we're doing now. What will it cost next year? Kind of. Not did we budget right or wrong.
Okay.
So technically, we're 4 million in a hole.
Well,
John?
well, there's 2.4 million right there. I mean, that was what you voted.
We have the 2.4 for this year. Next year is the concern where do we go up an extra 2.4 of what we're asking? We're asking for 12.7. Do we ask for 15.1? That's,
Well, Exhibit 2189, we can dig through the emails, dig through the files and come up with that exhibit. We can probably add a little clarity to that.
Mhm.
If I recall, and this may not be completely accurate, so I even hesitate to say anything, but my understanding of those non-lapsing funds were that there were certain grants that were carried over because we didn't utilize those dollars due to the schools being closed.
The grants are all very specific and for specific purposes. You've probably heard us say you can't supplant your budget with grants. You have to supplement. They're for additional things like special ed or Title I or school readiness.
But the 2.4 was basically a carryover from the previous year, I think. Is that what you're saying, Kate?
That's what I remember discussing, that there were certain grants we just, didn't make use of. And so that money was being carried over. I don't know if it was at the state level or what.
We also had 2.4, 2.5 in unused insurance monies.
Right.
That's all. Maybe creating some confusion.
Well, at the end of any year, what you don't spend goes back to the city. There's no, budgets are only 12 months. You can't perpetuate them. They're over. The money goes back into the city surplus, say.
But they made an exception that year. Is that possible to make an exception? I think that, I mean,
No.
I recall
Well,
something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, if they, again, how they finance our schools, if they want to take money from that we had just put into the surplus, or they want to use state aid or reserves or the tax levy, that's really up to them.
So regardless, we're really, what we need to decide is, I don't know if we can decide because it's already passed and brought to the city, but having known that before all of that would have increased our request. So I don't know that we can, I don't know if there's anything that we can do beyond what's already been done.
Right, because correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, the numbers we've seen are 139 million. And
Right.
this, our first exposure to 137.1.
Right, right. I mean, unless
Yes.
there can be discussions with the city that, you know, that's how we built the budget, and any decrease to that request is just,
Well, what I'm curious about is, you know, in the mayor's budget book, there's a message. It's called the budget message or something. It's 2 or 3 pages. And in that, he says there is an agreement to use, he calls it 3.5 million. But I haven't been able to find the agreement that he's talking about, he's writing about. So,
I assume that if there was a correspondence between the city and the superintendent's office or the board, that we would have something in central office, right? Because I don't
Right.
remember seeing any kind of communication, at
Right.
least at the board level.
right. There had to have been something that happened for this to get into the motion. I don't think it just would have come on without something. It was reliable.
So I just want to clarify, John, in essence, you're saying we don't really fully know where that 2.4 in funds that were, carryover funds, what their origin was.
Well, I believed they were the unspent funds from the 2019-20 budget. That was the year we closed in March. We had a lot of leftover money. I think it's the same amount, but I didn't think there were any strings attached to that they were one time, or they wouldn't be, we couldn't use them. It doesn't feel like we couldn't use them to make for 139. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Thank you, Ed. That's the mayor's message. And there, yes, he says the remaining, right, so he says, pursuant to a mutual understanding between the city and the Board of Ed, the Board of Ed was permitted to specifically designate the remaining FY20 surplus of 3.5 million to be used for future budgetary needs. As it turned out, it was 2.4 million. But if it's for future budgetary needs, that's what we did with it. In the motion. So once again, I'm trying to find that mutual understanding.
or the match of the 3.5 to the 2.4.
Yeah, anything at
think-
all.
I think that warrants a discussion. I mean, in my
Oh, yeah.
opinion, right? I mean, I don't know how else to
Can you,
proceed there.
Can you investigate this a little further and come back to us with a resolution or additional information? John?
Yeah, I plan to keep digging and find out. But
Okay.
exactly, perhaps David himself has something, an email he sent us, or the former mayor may have
Right,
something.
Okay, yeah. Mr. Cavo would be,
Yeah,
I would reach out to him,
yeah, because he wrote this.
right?
Okay, well. Time marches on and the sooner we get a resolution, the sooner we know that where we actually stand.
Right.
And if you should come up with some communications that did hit the central office,
I'll
please
share.
keep us apprised. Because
I will.
anyone else? Anyone else have a question? Okay. Is that it? Ladies and gentlemen, if we have no further questions, I'll conclude, entertain a motion to adjourn so we can move on to our next meeting.
So moved.
And certainly, John, Eddie, Kevin, please, yeah, we need a resolution.
Yep.
We need to know what's going on. I mean, it's
Yeah.
big difference, but it sounds like possibly last year's are the funds that are probably going to be reused back in the budget, but we don't know. I'm just fitting this with a broad stroke. Gladys, anything to add, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Just looking at that document, I do remember when we passed that motion, and I was very clear to Dr. Sal how he had that motion very specific. We had a discussion, and I said to him, "Is this the way that you want this motion to be read tonight?" And he said, "Yeah." It comes a sort of a, we can't find the information, but if I could get the date that agenda was passed, I have it here at my house. So I don't understand, trying to understand what the city is saying and what we use as far as the information that we had in the motion. So I'm a little sort of confused, Mr. Russo.
We're all
June 9th.
Join the crowd, Gladys. So am I.
It's on June 9th.
But I
is the
remember,
meeting.
no information came through to me as board chair at that particular time from the city. But I was very clear. Okay, let me see the date on that. Okay.
June 9th?
June the 9th. Okay, I have it here somewhere in my house because I keep everything. June the 9th. Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
I'll try. Okay, thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had everything we can handle this for tonight, and we will all dig deeper. I know June the 9th, I'm pretty sure I may be able to dig that up in an email. John, thank you for your input. Eddie, thank you for your work, sir.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Kate.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen,
I'll move to adjourn.
yes. No, wait, still, we're adjourned.